And it's such an honor and a privilege to say a very good morning to Nico Kleynhans. Thank you so much for coming in a bit earlier this morning, Nico.
Yeah, at least the traffic was not as heavy a little earlier.
True
so
story.
It becomes easier. 2 listeners triggered the theme for today. Did you know that there are 9 million South African children who grow up with absent fathers in South Africa? Put it another way, 39% of South African families are single parent families. So that is a very, very high statistic to have. The other point that I need to make before we go further is that the biological parents are considered natural guardians. So they have a special role to play. And the problem comes if one of those natural guardians is not active in the life of the child. Because now what happens with the parent who's got to draw up their will, who doesn't want the absent parent to inherit, wants the children to inherit, and the children are minors? How do they deal with the legal difficulties that arise? Well, what happened to Miss X? She went off to a bank, and although she was married, she decided the best way of dealing with it was to tell the bank she was unmarried. She was single. And so a will said, I am single. I want my child underage to inherit everything in the event of my death. Now, what she didn't understand is an underage minor cannot inherit. So in the event of her dying, that money would have been paid over to the Guardians Fund. And the Guardians Fund is one of those institutions put together by government to protect people. Now, you know what happens when the government puts together anything to protect anybody. It doesn't work in reality. It may work in theory, but it doesn't work in reality. So the first problem would have been, had she passed away, is that the Guardians Fund would have wanted to step in, would have taken the money. She hadn't appointed an alternative guardian, and now the social workers have got to make all kinds of decisions. The family court has to start getting involved. And if at this point the absent father appeared, he could disrupt the whole will. And not only can he disrupt the will, it will cause more trauma with the daughter, because now the father who has been absent suddenly reappears. She's dealing with grief, and now there's the stranger who says he's the father, and we don't know what the motives are that he's reappeared. Is he there because he actually cares about the daughter, or is he there because he will have access to funding? So one has to be really careful when you draw up your will. Get proper legal advice. The second story, which I come across fairly often, is different in that he and his wife have legally divorced. In terms of that divorce agreement, he is required to pay his wife a maintenance amount of money, and that is in place. His ex-partner has her share according to the divorce agreement. But in this case, the courts decided that he should have full custody of his children. And there would be a reason why the courts gave the father full custody of the children and not the mother. So in his case, he was about to proceed, and as we began to speak, he casually mentioned that the younger of the 2 children had special needs. Now, this means that she is unlikely ever to be able to take care of herself financially. She is going to need protection way beyond her 18th birthday. And if he fails to tell that fact to the attorney, the way his will is going to be set up is going to be a massive disadvantage for his daughter who has special needs, because it means that she will not be able to look after her own inheritance. A special trust would need to be created. Now, when you create a trust for your children, while they are legal minors, the tax rate is that of an individual. But when they're over a certain age, the tax rate of that trust becomes prohibitively expensive. And if that trust is not identified as a special trust, SARS will tax to a too high a rate. And so to protect the younger daughter, in fact, two trusts would need to be created. So if you have in your family a child with special needs, you have to be very clear, because the attorneys who draw up these wills, they are not trained to probe and ask the questions that should be asked. They expect you to provide them with the information that you have to have. The same if you're a grandparent and you want to leave money to your grandchildren. You need to be aware of that fact. Just to say, I give Mary 100,000 rand. If Mary has special needs, how's that going to happen? And in terms of every single parent, even if you are married and your partner is still around, you have to give alternative guardians. Because what happens if you and your spouse are in a motor car and you both die at the same time? If you have not nominated an alternative guardian, you place an enormous burden on the courts, who've now got to go hunting to find out who in your family setup could possibly be an alternative guardian, and what happens if they make a bad choice. Because when you choose your alternative guardians, you've got to look at what your value system is. What is it you want to achieve? Do your kids like the person that you've nominated as the alternative guardian? All of that is what you've got to take into account. And you've got to take into account the tax implications of what you're doing. So if you are an absent parent and you are the parent who's looking after the child, your will has got to make sure that the absent parent is cut off from the funding. Otherwise, that is a motivation for them to reappear. If you're a grandparent, you've got to make sure special needs are dealt with. Now, to avoid a problem, I cannot be your executor. Please don't ask me to do that. And I do not draw up wills. I am happy to read the will that you have drawn up. And I'm happy to do so on a Zoom meeting. So that means you must have access to a laptop. And I'm happy to explain that to you. But understand that as a result of this broadcast, there are going to be at least 30 requests for help. And you have to be sympathetic that if I only deal with this, when do I get on with some of the other things that I have to do in my office? But I am prepared to make sure that what you've got in place will fit your particular needs. Have a good day.
Thank you, Nico Kleynhans.